1850. Tabriz, Persia. Charged with apostasy, the young merchant Syed Ali Muhammad, known to his followers as the Bab, faces death by firing squad on the order of the Grand Vizier of the Persian Empire. Perched on the rooftops to witness his execution are crowds many multitudes strong. Soon they will bear witness to a most surreal event, the import of which will go far beyond the borders of Persia. But who is this man, the Bab, whose followers in a mere 3 years numbered in the thousands and whose revolutionary message was heard by millions? The great thinkers of the age had this to say of him.
This illustrious being arose with such power as to shake the foundations of the civic and religious laws, customs, manners, morals and habits of Persia, and instituted a new law and faith. The eminent men of the state and the leaders of religion arose one and all to destroy and annihilate him. He single-handedly withstood them and set all of Persia in motion.
And in his own words,
I am the promised one. I am the one whose name you have for 1,000 years invoked, at whose mention you have risen, whose advent you have longed to witness, and the hour of whose revelation you have prayed God to hasten. I am the promised one.
Merchants and traders, his attributes moved his father to remark on his early wisdom, intelligence, and humility.
My name is Muhammad Riza. After 40 years, the exalted Lord graced me with a child that has caused me to wonder over his behaviour. It is hard to say which of his amazing conditions should I recount. Of him, such peculiar characters are manifest that excite one's wonder. Now that he has reached the age of 5, at times he raises his hands in prayers to the threshold of singular God. Sometimes he is immersed in rapture or preoccupied with the imaginary world.
Aged 15, the Bab joined his uncle in commerce, remaining for a while in Shiraz, before moving to the port city of Bushir. From there, he travelled to Atabat in Arabia, engaging in meditation and theological discourse with the leader of a progressive Islamic sect, before returning once more to Shiraz. There, the Bab married Katiha Begum, his mother's paternal cousin, and in time, she too bore witness to his unearthly grace.
My name is Khadija Begum, wife of the Bab. One night, unlike any other, he came home at dusk, about an hour and a half into the night. The dinner was served and he joined others for this purpose. Afterwards, he came to bed and retired for the night. It was not longer after that I saw him rise from the bed and leave the room towards the outer courtyard. When his absence prolonged and he did not return, I became concerned. I rose from my bed and went out to look for him, but he was nowhere to be found. Trying the street door, I found it locked from within. I checked the chamber of his mother and did not find him there either. By then I was deeply bewildered and perplexed. I walked to the western side of the courtyard, looked up towards the upper chamber, situated on the eastern direction of the house and serving as his private quarters, and saw that it was well lighted. It seemed as if 1,000 lamps illuminated the room. This added to my surprise, because we had no guests that required such a profusion of light. Therefore, with astonishment, I went up the steps of the chamber. When I entered, I noticed although only one light was in the room, it was so brilliantly lit that it overwhelmed me. In the morning, when we were having breakfast, with a heavenly smile he said, "What is it that troubles you? You are agitated." I drank a bit of tea, which to a prescribed degree calmed my nerves. I stated, "What event and condition were last night that I beheld in your chamber?" He replied, "What a peculiar time you arrived. That was untimely, but it was the will of God to see with your own eyes."
Ultimately, in Shiraz, the Bab would meet the man who was to be the first to recognize his mission and become his follower.
I am Mullah Hussein. As a young scholar, I was on a life-changing quest. I felt drawn, as if by a magnet, to Shiraz, a city renowned for the perfume of its roses and the singing of nightingales. A approaching the city gate on the evening of May 22nd, 1844, I was greeted by a radiant young man in a green turban, who met me as if he were a lifelong friend. Overwhelmed by his expressions of affection and loving kindness, this youth, who had met me outside the gate of Shiraz, invited me to visit his home, there to refresh myself after the fatigues of my journey. We spent the entire night immersed in conversation. I was astonished to discover that each of the characteristics I was seeking in the promised one was manifest in this young man. Before departing the next morning, my host addressed me with these words: "O thou, who art the first to believe in me, verily I say, I am the Bab, the gate. 18 souls must, in the beginning, spontaneously and of their own accord, accept me and recognize the truth of my revelation." The message came like a clap of thunder. For a while I could neither see, nor feel, nor hear. It was too great to be true. I could not realize what had happened. I became excited and happy. Before, I had been weak and powerless. I became glad and strong. I felt that I had so much courage and power that even if all the world were to rise up against me, I would be able to meet any attack or difficulty. The world, and all things, seemed like a handful of dust in my grasp.
His voice, like that of the angel Gabriel, calling all mankind to awake and telling them to arise. Enter therein, O peoples of the world, for he who is the promised one is come.
Proclaim unto every longing lover, behold, your well-beloved hath come among men. Lo, the adored one hath appeared arrayed in the fullness of his glory.
Once the Bab had proclaimed his mission, within weeks, 17 more people had, by their own spontaneous efforts, recognized his station, had renounced comforts and security of their old ways of life, and severed from all attachments, set out on the mission of spreading his teachings. thousands became followers of the Bab, who, overturning the corrupt practices of the Persian clergy, upended tradition by abrogating the laws of the past. Hence, the Bab was banished from city to city, from prison to prison. Where he was sent, his grace, the magnetic attraction of his personality, won the admiration of civic leaders and townspeople. The Bab's followers, meanwhile, cut off from their leader, boldly defended themselves against the full force of the state. In thousands, men, women, and children suffered cruel and brutal ends. Yet, the promised future remained brighter and clearer than ever.
Let your vision be world-embracing, rather than confined to your own self.
Recounting the stories of these valiant dawnbreakers, our minds turn to the poetess Tahira. Her rare intellectual gifts, her fervid eloquence, her fearless devotion, and her glorious martyrdom. An exemplar of women's strength in Persia, who raised call to the cause of female emancipation.
My name is Tahira, the pure one, known also as Kuratulain, the consolation of the eyes. I was considered beautiful in this world, but I was concerned only in higher beauty. God's great gift to me was inner sight. I was first to recognize the station of the Bab in a dream.
At the gate of my heart, I behold the feet and the tents of the host of calamity.
And there was that heart-shattered boy Anis in Tabriz, who, hearing of the blessed Bab, longed to go to him. Fearing that one glimpse of the Bab would enchant him permanently, as it did thousands before him, he was imprisoned by his own family. Yet, only a few years later, it was Anis's head that rested over the Bab's heart as they hung, bound from the walls of the barrack square of Tabriz, awaiting death.
Rejoice, he said. The hour is approaching when, in this very city, I shall be suspended before the eyes of the multitude and shall fall a victim to the fire of the enemy. I shall choose no one except you to share with me the cup of martyrdom. Rest assured that this promise which I give you shall be fulfilled.
Mirza Taqi Khan, the Grand Vizier of the Sultan, orders the Bab's execution. The Bab is moved from the mountain prison of Schroeder to a cell in the barracks of Tabriz. At sunrise on that fateful morning, the Bab is brought before religious leaders to receive their condemnation. In carrying out this instruction, the chief guard interrupts the barb in the midst of a private conversation with his scribe. The barb turns and warns him sternly.
Not until I have told him all that I wish to say can any earthly power silence me.
Later, the barb and Anis, barefoot and bound in iron chains, with collars around their necks, are dragged violently to execution. Cruel taunts, stones and mud are hurled at them as they are marched through the teeming streets and bazaars of the city. Exhausted, the prisoners arrive at the barracks. Anis is placed again in a cell. The barb is led away to execution. Refusing to be kept behind bars, Anis is allowed to rejoin the barb. Greatly moved by the barb's courage, the colonel is overcome by fear he might be committing an act that would condemn him forever.
Free me from the obligation to shed your blood,
he urges the barb. But the barb bids him to carry out his instructions, assuring him that if his intentions are sincere, the Almighty would deliver him from his perplexity. Later, the barb is brought out and led to the execution site. Opposite the cells on one side of the square, spikes have been driven into the ground. First Anis and then the barb are suspended by heavy ropes from the stone gutters erected under the eaves of the cells. The barb remains silent. His pale and handsome face, framed by its black beard and small moustache, his refined manners, his simple yet neat garments. Everything about him arouses sympathy and compassion. Anis implores to be executed before the barb, asking to be positioned so as to shield the barb from bullets. The colonel acquiesces. The prisoner's shoulders are bound firmly together, Anis's head on the barb's chest, both suspended 3 meters above the ground. Watching the spectacle unfold, thousands of restless spectators have fanned out to watch the execution from the surrounding rooftops. The colonel gives the order. His soldiers raise their guns. The crowds fall silent, hearts pounding heavily. The colonel signals to the head of the squadron, who orders the first file to fire. Moments later, the next file is ordered to fire too. Volley upon volley of shots ring out. From the guns, a mighty smoke rises, obscuring the bodies of the prisoners from the crowds of onlookers. But as the smoke clears, astounded eyes look upon a scene scarcely able to believe what they are seeing. For there, standing before them, is Anis. Yet the barb himself is nowhere to be seen. Uproar rises from all sides. A great clamour of wonder, admiration and awe pours out from the bewildered crowds who proclaim the barb has disappeared. The barb has walked back to the cell unscathed to finish his conversation with his scribe, the soldier's bullets having cut him free of his ropes, allowing him to drop to the ground without a single scratch. Eventually, a soldier discovers the barb seated in the room he had been lodged in the night before. Seeing him, the barb calmly remarks,
I have now finished my conversation with my scribe. You may now proceed to carry out your intention.
The colonel of the regiment, shaken, orders his men to leave the barracks immediately, swearing never to resume the task, even if it were to cost him his life. no sooner do his men depart, when the colonel of the bodyguard volunteers to continue the execution. The barb and anise, tied together, are suspended from the fatal post, whilst a large-scale force of soldiers form lines to open fire, determined not to endure a second humiliation. It is now 2 hours from the official commencement of the execution. This time, however, the barb is not silent, and all who are there can hear him say,
"Had you believed in me, O wayward generation, every one of you would have followed the example of this youth, who stood in rank above most of you, and willingly would have sacrificed himself in my path. The day will come when you will have recognized me. That day I shall have ceased to be with you."
Oh
Just as before, the shots ring out. As they do, a gale of exceptional severity sweeps across the city. A whirlwind of dense dust obscures the sun. Thereafter, silence. The bodies are taken down and dumped unceremoniously by the moat outside the gate of Tabriz. Their chests riddled with bullets, their limbs torn to shreds, their bodies merged into one mass of flesh and bone. Yet, their faces remain untouched, a smile still lingering on the Barb's lips. At midnight, the bodies are taken away by his followers, who smuggle them to a silk factory and hide them under bales of silk. Later still, the casket in which they are placed is secretly transferred to Persia's capital, Heran. In this manner, over many years and long journeys, being transported secretly from place to place, the remains of the Bab and Anis eventually reach the Holy Land, where they are finally laid to rest.
There is no paradise more wondrous for any soul than to be exposed to God's manifestation in his day, to hear his verses and believe in them, to attain his presence, which is naught but the presence of God, to sail upon the sea of the heavenly kingdom of his good pleasure, and to partake of the choice fruits of the paradise of his divine oneness.
God's manifestation
recall that during the darkest nights of his incarceration, bereft of contact with his devoted followers, the Bab was refused even a lamp by his captors. Yet, today, hundreds of thousands of visitors each year can view the luminous shrine that houses his earthly remains. In this way, illumined each and every night, the shrine of the Bab, standing on Mount Carmel, is a singular point of attraction in the Holy Land.
The story of the Bab was that of spiritual heroism unsurpassed. If a young man could, in only 6 years of ministry, by the sincerity of his purpose and the attraction of his personality, so inspire rich and poor, cultured and illiterate alike, that they would remain staunch though hunted down and without trial sentenced to death, his life must be one of those events in the last 2 centuries which is truly worthy of study.
O glory of the most glorious, Ya Baha'u'llah